last Wednesday night session in preparation for a Welcome Discernment, actually in preparation for our March 12th forum. And please watch for more information about that forum, where we'll be reflecting and discussing all that we've learned over the last 5 weeks. Tonight, Phil Waite will be leading us in taking a long view, a broad view, a different view of marriage. But before we begin, I'd like to lead us in prayer, and I'd like to use a prayer that I use with my kindergarten through second grade Sunday school students. At the end of every session, we gather in a circle, and we say 3 things. We say, God, help us to hear your voice. We want to walk in your ways and be your people. And then we lift our hands. So would you say that with me? God, we want to hear your voice. We want to walk in your ways and be your people. Now I'd like you to stand and let's say it again with some pauses in between and think about what that means. God, help us to hear your voice. We want to walk in your ways. And we want to be your people. Amen. Be seated. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Phil. You all know him. And then there will be some time for small group discussion at the end. And at the very end, some of you asked for a copy of the 9 suggestions that Lauren Johns made last Sunday, and we have copies of those to distribute if you'd like to take one with you at the end before you leave. Okay, Phil?
Good evening. So I said that I was going to explain why I put on this sweatshirt, and I would only do it once. So as people come in and they don't hear it, then that's just tough luck for them, I guess. So this is a Camelot sweatshirt, and I'm going to advertise. Goshen High School is performing Camelot. The opening night is 2 weeks from Friday night, this coming Friday night. And my son's in it, and he wants me to wear this to advertise it. But I thought it would be fun to wear this Camelot sweatshirt when I was doing a session about marriage, because the main plot, device is around adultery, and these high school students putting on a play that deals with adultery. I don't know. That seems kind of strange to me a little bit. I'm not being critical, but it just kind of seems a little strange. So that's all. So I'm wearing Camelot. We can think about what Camelot came out in 1960, what it says about changing understandings of marriage at the time. Probably would have been a day when a show like Camelot simply couldn't have made a run. Most of us here are experts on marriage. So just congratulate yourself. And as I thought about this topic and working on this is an impossible task. One is marriage is something that's lived, something that we experience, and it's hard to talk about it. The other thing is when you think about the whole history of humans and marriage, you're just covering thousands of years and in just a very short time. So I'm going to try to focus on several things. The first thing I want to do is I want to ask a question, and I want somebody to don't blurt out. If you blurt out, I'll send you to the principal's office. Don't blurt out. Raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and you give me I want a one-word answer. So for those of you who are married, why did you get married? One word, a verb, one verb answer. Raise your hand. Don't blurt out. Raise your hand. Anybody wants to? Why did you get married? Aura, you're companionship. All right, so how many got married? Those of you who are married, how many got married in part, not the only reason, but in part for companionship? Raise your hand. All right, somebody else, another word. Another one-word answer. Bill. Love. How many of you got married for love? Part of the reason. Raise your hands. Okay. I'm looking for people who don't have their hands up and are married. It's like, this is my card. Give me a call. I'll be waiting for your call. Another word. Anybody else want another word besides those two? I think that's a good start. Jenny. Service. How many of you, that's good. Thank you, Jenny. How many would say service? Jenny, Martin, Ken, Marty, there's a few people. Don didn't, but Marty did. I don't know what that means. Sorry. I'm learning. Good, Don. It doesn't stop, does it? All right. How many of you? I'm gonna switch this. How many of you got married for money? Raise your hand. How many got married for money? Was that the reason you got married? Anybody get married for money? Well, Don, you got married for money? No. I was a washout on that. Anybody? Going, gone. Nobody got married for money. At least not that they're willing to admit publicly in this setting. We're not going to do a lie detector test tonight, all right? So you can relax on that. How many of you got married because you wanted great in-laws? Raise your hand. In-laws were great. Got married because in-laws were great. So a few of you went the in-law route. How many? So we'll go, money sounds kind of crass, but how many of you got married to improve your financial prospects? So that's a little different than money, right? Yeah, yeah. Artists married nurses. And the other thing about that is that was a more general question, right? You got married generally because two people sometimes can make a better go of things in life economically than one on their own. Now we're going to switch a little bit. You're going to have to work a little bit harder. Why did your parents get married? One word. Why did so we're going back. We might be going back quite a ways here. The marriages that were maybe even beginning, people were married in the 19th century, some people's parents. Why were your parents, Betty?
There was a pregnancy.
Pregnancy, okay. Stan. Service? Phyllis?
My father's first wife died, and he needed someone to take care of that baby that did survive.
Okay.
So he married a cousin.
A caregiver. Yeah. Caregiving. Betty.
There was a pregnancy, but they were in the Amish church and they had to.
Okay. That was a requirement of the community. The community insisted on it. Jenny.
Wasn't a dysfunctional family situation, but both of them just fell madly in love because they didn't have a good family situation. All I want to say, I don't know.
So, escape. So they were escaping family situations. Yeah. Now, you two. 574-312-8365.
I would like to answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
My attraction to him was his funny sense of humor.
Okay.
I needed to laugh. I was way too serious.
And were you right? Was it a good? In that moment? Did you make a good decision, or were you deceived? Don't answer. Just stop right here, Kent.
Whether it's those characteristics or others, it's for balance.
For balance, okay. So we're going to switch again. Oh boy, now it's going to get harder yet. Why did your parents have kids? What was their motivation, their purpose for having kids? Again, same process, hand up, one-word answer. Catherine. All right, I will repeat. I may use euphemisms, but I'll repeat what's said. They hadn't invented prevention yet. That's a direct quote. That's what Catherine said, and I think, Don. Expectations. Okay. Sam?
My mother is gifted at caring for others, and so it was natural for her to have children.
Okay, she wanted to have children because the caregiving was part of who she was, part of her character. Others? Elton? They loved each other. But I mean, why do they have kids? They had kids because they loved each other. Okay, got it. Marilyn?
My parents both came from families with one sibling, which was very unusual. So they chose to have 7.
Okay. How many of you had parents who needed labor on the farm? Raise your hand if that's true. Labor on the farm. So let's ask another question here. Why did you have kids? What was the purpose? Why did you have kids? I mean, we got enough people in the world. You could have adopted, really. Come on. Me too, right? We could have. But we wanted to have kids. Why? Catherine? So you adopted 3, but you wanted a child of your own. Why? But why?
Well, I had some pretty serious problems with my pregnancy.
Yeah?
But then I was hearing about people that were adopting children from Korea
Yeah.
because of what our boys did to the women there.
Yeah.
So we got the boy, and meanwhile somebody else said, oh, well, this child needs, we just had children like you wouldn't believe. And they've all been very satisfactory.
Okay. Jan?
Children are a special joy.
Okay. So joy.
I still stop and look at babies in the grocery store and the mall.
Okay.
They're special.
So just the joy of experiencing a baby. Others? Propagation. So passing on the genes. Okay. Abner?
Well, I couldn't imagine what a child would look like coming from Ann and I.
So curiosity. Yeah, just pure curiosity. So this is very much a part of our lives. I want to say right now that everything in the scope of history, the scope of human history, and the scope of pretty much every religion, everything that you've answered would be seen as just pure hogwash, with the possible exception of propagation and labor. Marriage for love and having children for joy, not that there wasn't joy in marriage, and love in marriage and joy in having children, but those were not appropriate reasons for getting married and for having kids for most of human history. Until about 200 years ago, things began to change. We think that our understandings of marriage are normal. And the most anti-family, anti-marriage religion in the history of the world has been Christianity, which is shocking to us. But if you stop and think about what Jesus said and what Paul said, it's correct. For Christians, what is the most important social unit in the Christian community? What is the most important social unit for Christians? The church. The church tops everything. And when we identify ourselves, we shouldn't identify ourselves primarily by family. Our loyalty should not be to our parents. What did Jesus say about this? Who are my family members? The people who do the will of the one that sent me. So Christians have been very hard on family. and very hard on families and family connections, and they have chosen to see the church as the primary source of social connection, economic connection, and political connection over against the family. So it's very, very important to say that. But families exist, Elton.
But if you didn't have children, you're going to have a people for church.
Well, correct. So that's the reason to have children, is so that there are children in the church.
Are you implying you still think that's the case today?
That I still think that what's the case?
Still think that is the case today?
For Christians today? Oh, certainly not. But I'm saying if we're trying to understand, trying to get to a New Testament understanding of marriage and having children, we have flown so far off of where that was that we have some work to do to get back to that. And I have some ideas for how we might think of that, but we'll get to that at the end. But if we're going to make it that to the end, we're going to have to move along. How many of you are familiar with a story written by this fellow named Shakespeare called Romeo and Juliet? Romeo and Juliet is set in a context, right, where two lovers are trying to get together, and their families are trying to prevent them to get together, right? That is a love story. We understand that. And throughout history, decisions as to who could marry and who could not marry were not made by individuals. So the whole notion that I would marry somebody because I might enjoy living with them for personal satisfaction, for joy, for pleasure, was a luxury that humans have not had through most of their history. The main reason for getting married was for economic and social purposes, to strengthen communities. This is just very clear throughout history. So it's a very important decision. So who do you think should be making this decision? Adolescents? Who do you think should be making some of the most important decisions in society? Well, no. People who are experienced, elders in the community, these are the ones who should be deciding who marries and who's best to marry for the good of the community. And there was an article in the New York Times a couple days ago, and we've all seen articles like this, where a couple in Afghanistan loved each other, and they were murdered because they wanted to marry for love. They had, I think, maybe already been married, forced marriages by their families, by their communities, for the good of the community, and they were murdered for violating those rules. To us, that's shocking. I mean, it's utterly shocking. To most of human history, we are the shocking ones. Really important to understand that. So how did this notion of marrying for love come about? Well, a couple hundred years ago, personal satisfaction, happiness, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Enlightenment became very important. And individuals decided that they were going to start making decisions based on personal happiness. That would be an important reason to make a decision. And so over time, we got to the point in the 20th century where that's why people got married. The purpose that people got married was happiness. Over time, we no longer needed kids for labor on the farm. The main reason to have kids economically was because we needed people to work. There wasn't a division. There were divisions of labor, but every member of a household was expected to work and contribute economically to the well-being of the household. The notion that children would go to school was just luxury. Who could imagine such a thing? Everybody had to work. This was the notion of marriage and family. The problem happens. So if the main purpose of marriage is love and happiness and companionship, what happens in a marriage when the person that you're married to no longer makes you happy and you no longer love them in terms of feeling love? What happens? The reason, the very purpose for which you got married no longer exists. So what are you going to do? So suddenly marriage becomes a very shaky institution on shaky ground. Now let me be clear. I'm not arguing for arranged marriages. My children would, I'd be in big trouble. Can you imagine? So I'm not arguing for that. I just want us to be really, really clear how unique our understanding of these institutions are, marriage and childbearing, in the history of humanity, and even in the context of our own faith. The way we think is just not the way most people have thought through human history. And some of it, I think, has to do with economic stability. We have the luxury of a love marriage. We have the luxury of individuals pursuing life, things for personal satisfaction and happiness. During times when food could not be taken for granted, when people didn't know where their next meal was going to come from, where there was famine and disease, you needed all hands on deck. And you needed every institution in your society functioning to keep your community viable. Otherwise, it could collapse. And so you needed marriage to do certain things. So historically in marriage, the first people to marry were hunter-gatherers that needed to expand their family networks, their kinship networks. So their main reason to marry was in-laws. They needed in-laws. And this still happens today. I trade on my in-laws a lot. It's very helpful to me. I did really well in the in-law game, and not just in terms of my profession, but in terms of my parents-in-law have lent us money at key times in our lives, and we needed some money for a mortgage or getting a car. I mean, all those kinds of things. By expanding our family network, by having in-laws, we were able to expand our economic capacity as a couple. So you can see how that functions, and even today on our scale, but how crucial that was in an earlier time when humans were more marginal. Well, over time, humans settled down, and one of the things that happened is aristocrats people who got wealthy began to use marriage as a means to consolidate wealth and power. So they would marry, that's where language like commoners. We don't want to marry a commoner. We want to marry other people who have wealth and status to combine our wealth and status and into even more wealth and status. And we see this phenomenon at work today with the 1% intermarrying and the 1%. We see this phenomenon at work already again in the emergence of what might be called a new aristocracy. So the use of marriage as a social tool on the part of the power to get more powerful became crucial. But other groups too, even through history, have understood that marriage could be a very helpful tool for survival. So through history, what do you think the average length of a marriage would be? Just anybody have a guess? How long do you think people have been married through history? With the average marriage in the scope of human history? Any thought? It might be about 20 years. And the reason is people died young, right? So the notion of marriages that last as long as some of our marriages have lasted is simply unheard of from a historical standpoint. This just didn't happen. People didn't live long enough to be married this long. So that's another way that what we experience as marriage now is very different. So I'm going to just pause just to ask for a few questions, and then I want to shift the conversation. I'm going to pause at this point just for a few questions or observations. This is a lot to hit you with in a very short period of time. Don?
An observation. Most of us, I think, involved sex somewhere in marriage. That word has not been used yet this evening. And I just wondered where that plays into the role, or are we just conditioned to use other language?
Well, we can talk a lot about sexuality, but that opens up. I mean, that would be a whole nother 2 hours. And so partly that's why I don't bring it up. But obviously there has been a connection historically with sexuality and marriage, but it's not necessarily what we would think. But that's a whole long history. One of the things that's been pretty crucial in terms of marriage is the disconnecting of marriage to childbirth. So what, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, it would have been controversial in the church for a couple to choose not to have children, right? This was not done. There was something wrong with those people. And even if there wouldn't have been a big process about whether they could join the church, there would have been gossip, and they would have been looked down on as really not quite really married, or something wrong with them, or they're selfish for not wanting to have children, and so on. I think these things were commonly said. Well, that's not even true anymore. Now that's not even an issue. A couple that doesn't want to have children, we don't even think about that. Maybe some people do still, I don't know, but I haven't heard anybody complain about a couple choosing not to have children. And I've known some who've chosen not to have children. That's possible. That's a choice that people have now. So decoupling sex from rearing children, and even marriage from rearing children, is a huge change in my lifetime, even, Gay.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I also get the feeling, as I read Scripture, Old Testament, and so forth, marriage is also a way of protecting women.
Well, yeah, it was. So, and this segues. That's a segue for me to where I'm going. But historically, the purpose of marriage was to help society function in a just way, according to the standards that society might have of what justice would be. So marriage, you had all kinds of legal arrangements, right? What were the obligations? What are the obligations of the husband? What are the obligations of the husband's family? What are the obligations of the spouse? What are they? So all these things were spelled out at first in custom and then later in written law, in order to produce the kind of society that they wanted to have. So the point that I want to make, that in Scripture, it was always about what kind of society is a just society, and how does marriage serve that end? Okay? What kind of society is a just society? What kind of society is a godly society? And how does marriage serve that end? So marriage is not a tool for personal satisfaction, personal fulfillment. It is a tool to help create the kind of society that God wants us to have. And as Christians, I think this way of thinking about marriage, and I'm talking about shading, I'm not talking about either or. Obviously, we're still going to get married because we're attracted to somebody and we love somebody, and there's that spark, and I look in their eyes, and all that stuff that we have experienced, many of us in our lives, most of us, at some point, and then we learn that it's hard and we carry on as best we can. And then there are those moments again where it happens again in our relationships, and the ebb and flow of marriage. But I want us to think a little bit about what if we think of the purpose of marriage being also to make the world a better place? What does it mean to say the church, my community, the world is better off because I'm married to this person? And that may involve childbearing. It may not. I've known couples that I would say are generative, who don't have children, but who I can look at and I can say, the world is a better place because these two people married each other. Our society is better, the church is better, they serve the church, and that's why the comment about service, marrying for service, I think I jumped at that and I said, aha, because that's what I'm talking about, marrying for service. That within the marriage there's a common purpose that a couple has of service, of serving society, and that together we are greater than the sum of our parts as a couple and can serve better. And that this might be a way for us to think of the meaning of Christian marriage. So what I want to do with, what I want to move to in this regard, so begin to think, we have to think about what kind of society, what kind of world does God want? What is justice? How does God want us to relate with each other? What does God want human communities to look like? What is a healthy human community? And then begin to think, how does marriage help that to happen? So what I would like you to do, I want to break up in groups now, and I want to pose the question, name a couple, identify a couple that you think by being married they've made the community a better place. So I would really like you to not make it personal. Well, they blessed me. I want you to think more in terms of the world is a better place, my community is a better place, or that community was a better place because that couple got married. And together they were a blessing on that community, and they made it more just and more loving and more reflective of God's goodness. So I want you to identify a couple like that, and then I want you to explain in your groups how that happened. What did you witness? What did you see that made them that way? So just take a little bit of time, just that one question, and just take some time in groups of 3 or 4, 2, 3 or 4, yeah, just to talk about that question.